So I'm sorry to say it, but Echo, the latest character in Overwatch, is, in any way you slice it, completely overtuned. She has one of the highest damage per seconds in the game, the best burst damage ability in the game with her sticky grenades, a beam that deals 200 damage per second on anyone under 50% health, and an ultimate that copies the character of anyone on the opposing team for 15 seconds, and allows you to use their ultimate during it. All of this is coupled with enough mobility in her flight to push into any advantage or retreat from any compromised position. Needless to say, this kit is way too rounded for any character in the game, and she needs some kind of scaling back. Now, I know there's no easy way to convince you a hero is broken, and each different rank has enough people throwing on every single character to take on the American military, but I'm sure you'll grant me that as the level of play we're talking about gets higher, people start using the characters in a way that's closer and closer to optimal. Similarly, if a character can be shown to fill the same role as others, but do the job in a numerically better way, they are simply better at the job. Her primary fire, when cycled with stickies on cooldown, does a ridiculous 142.5 DPS. To put it into context, the only characters in the DPS category which beat her on damage are Turret Form Bastion, Reaper within 10 meters range, and Symmetra at her highest charge level. If you want to break shield and deal raw damage to tanks from range, she is currently the undisputable best choice in the game. If you were to compare her focusing beam with the nearest analogue, which is Genji's dash, which guarantees a kill on any character that can be brought under 80 health with a dash melee combo, Echo sometimes doubles that kill window to 100 HP on squishy targets and 250ish on most tanks. The 200 damage per second beam will outcompete any focused healing, but it can however be stopped with shields and direct life-saving abilities, whereas the dash simply kills up front. But the problem with interrupting it and saving the person is that the beam isn't far off an instant kill, since any character in the game dies to it in less than 1.5 seconds, leaving very little reaction room. Her stickies, when all of them hit, is a 180 damage burst, and only 3 of them need to hit to bring a squishy under 110 health, which effectively insta-kills the target with the beam. Lastly, her ultimate is one of the best in the game, with a reasonably low cost to charge, sitting at the same level as most of the major DPS ultimates. But despite costing the same, it has a much slower time to charge, since Echo is always going to kick out more DPS than any of the rest of them. It can be used to buy any of the enemy's ultimates, including the incredibly slow charging and more costly defensive healing ultimates, such as Beat, Rally, Beam and Transcendence. But since it requires charging, it's often better to use it proactively on a tank and get some quick value. Obviously there are some weaknesses to Echo, namely her large hitbox, which is strictly a major negative, and the travel time of her primary fire and stickies, which makes them much harder to use. The skill required to get the most from a kit will become less of a hindrance over time as people learn to play their character, and it's already stopped being much of a problem entirely at the higher skill brackets, which is why the current tournaments always seem to have Echo mirrored. Having Echo simply decreases your team's time to kill by such a substantial amount that it's hard for me to believe anyone would defend her balance. Most people in the Overwatch community have a very strong intuition that not only is personal preference king when it comes to hero choice, but that something isn't a problem or overpowered unless they can see the warping of the meta around them. Insta-kill characters and characters that enforce a rigid meta will always receive enough pushback to get changed. But people find it hard to perceive the slow power creep of increasing damage and healing, and Blizzard decreasing the time to kill by about 5% at a time just isn't enough to be noticeable, or especially enough to make a headline. From what I've seen, Blizzard have always designed and balanced characters with the rule of cool, and their aim in development has always been to solely capture the fantasy of the hero. But unless they're adopting the idea of release it broken and nerfing to acceptability, or genuinely just haven't already compared the damage each hero deals, the balancing of this character just doesn't make sense to me. I'm sure that Echo will start getting kickback from the community soon. It's a long time until Overwatch 2 is going to be released and any new heroes upset the balance. But she won't get kickback because of her oppressive DPS and amazing burst damage from her stickies. It will be because the players start getting tired of being melted in half a second by the focusing beam. And I really doubt Blizzard will change the beam's damage, unless they absolutely have to, because melting people with a beam of plasma is clearly part of the hero's fantasy. But on the other hand, they clearly know there's a problem with the ability. As it is now, she's simply much more lethal and adaptable than other heroes, and dropping her damage might force her to take up a niche as much more of a high ground flanker and opportunist killer, rather than allowing her to be both better than Soldier and Genji at the same time. But anyway, thanks for watching all the way to the end. Please do sub if you enjoyed the content, and I'll be back soon with more. Next time I'm going to be doing a piece on MMR and how it's normally calculated in games.